lined paper in those binders we used to have in school with the 3 rings? Is it leather notebooks that you carry around in your backpack or your purse that you jot down interesting thoughts? Is it college? Are you thinking of the long nights that you spent rereading and reviewing your notes as you got ready for a test or an exam? Is it, not having notes, losing your notes, not knowing where you put your notes, having someone borrow your notes and never giving them back? Okay. Now take that whole world you just thought of, all those images and associations and sights and sounds. That is not what I mean by digital note-taking. Okay, we're using the same word, note-taking, because it does have some things in common. But for most people, notes are totally associated with school, right? At some point, maybe in elementary school, middle school, a teacher said, hey, everyone, take notes on this, or take out your notebooks. And you took out your notebook, and what that seemed to entail was you writing down word for word what the teacher was saying. You very likely received very little instruction. If you were lucky, you maybe got some tips on how to create the little tabs. Maybe someone even taught you how to, make 2 columns and kind of structure the notes on the page. But for the most part, we receive almost 0 instruction and guidance in how to take notes. In school, notes have a very specific purpose, which is the test, right? The teacher says something like, this is going to be on the test, write this down. And what that creates is this entire expectation that the only reason you take notes is for the test, right? The minute that test is over, the semester is over, what generally happened to those notes? They got chucked out the window into the trash and you never saw those things again. Okay. So in school, it was clear what you had to take notes on. It was for a finite amount of time and you knew when the test was coming. Once you finish school, that completely changes. Now think about your professional life or just think about your adult life. In that situation, you still have notes. You still have things you need to remember, things you want to review, things you need to keep track of, but it's not at all clear what you should be taking notes on. No one pops out and says, hey, take notes on this as you're reading a book or listening to a podcast or watching a webinar like this one. It's not clear the time horizon. They could be used for tomorrow. They could be useful in a week, in a month, in a year, who knows? And they can last a lifetime. There's no reason if you write down a piece of knowledge, knowledge is inherently reusable. It's not one-time use only. When you know something, the power of knowledge is it can be used again and again and again. So you can start to think about years, decades of time that these notes are going to be useful. So basically, my whole work is about how to train people in this new perspective on taking. How do you take notes for your adult life? How do you take them for your professional life? How do you take them to create content, to think better, to have more insights, to have breakthroughs? It's a whole other side of note-taking, which I call digital notes. So if you're wondering where this comes from, it all comes from a course that I teach called Building a Second Brain. Been teaching it for about 3.5 years. We're currently in the 11th version, the 11th cohort of students. Everyone takes the course as part of a cohort, as part of a group. And the 11th cohort is actually kicking off, or at least the enrollment is opening on Monday. It's actually Sunday night at midnight. So if you like what you see here, you're completely free to join that. So here's what I want to talk about as your introduction to this new kind of note-taking. I want to talk about the what. What exactly are we saving? What exactly are we talking about when we say notes? I want to talk about the how. I'm going to give you 4 super practical examples that you can actually start doing today to just start getting the value from this way of working. And then we're going to finish on the why. Like, what is the big picture? Why does all this matter in terms of the economy, in terms of how the world is changing, in terms of the internet and all these things? So I want to start by the what. Okay. When I say note-taking, I don't mean save everything. You didn't want to save everything when we were doing notes on paper. You don't want to save everything when it's digital. Now, this is not necessarily obvious because with digital, you could theoretically save everything, right? You could just buy more cloud storage, buy more hard drives, just keep extending, and save every email, every calendar invite, every folder and file in your entire life. You could do that, but I really, really encourage you not to do that. And the reason is all that has a cost. All of that costs money for storage space. It has a cost in terms of just complexity. It's stuff you have to manage. And it's really unclear if any of that or most of that is going to be useful. So really, when I talk about your second brain, think about your first brain, your biological brain. You are selective about what you keep in there, right? You don't expose your first brain to any kind of information or any kind of inputs. You're selective. You have a filter, and the same is true of your second brain. So these are the 4 criteria that I found most useful in deciding what to save in your second brain, which, by the way, is just my term for your system of notes, your system of knowledge management. So let's just go through these briefly. Inspiring, something that could inspire you if it surfaced at some point in the future. Some people ask, why don't I just use Google? Anytime I need an answer to a question, I can just Google it. There's no reason to do all this work. But here's the thing. You can't Google a feeling. If you're stuck in some piece of writing or some creative project and you need some inspiration, some motivation, some sort of breakthrough in what you're working on, you can't instantly find and call up with a search something that is personally meaningful for you, inspiring to you. This is one of the primary uses of your second brain. When you see a phrase that is beautifully written, save it. When you see a photo on Instagram or anywhere that's just cool, save it in a central place. When you find a poem or a song or a website or whatever it is that you could use as a model or as inspiration or as a template, save that in your second brain. That is worth saving. The second is it useful? Right? So, inspiring stuff is great, but sometimes you just want to save tools. You want to save answers to problems, right? If you figure out how to, save the, or fix the SEO on your website, might take an hour or two to figure out that solution. Get that information and save it in your second brain. If you figure out how to, clean the gutters on your house, write that down, save it in your second brain. If you're constantly solving all these little problems in your daily life, and it's likely you're going to encounter those same or similar problems in the future. That's the kind of stuff, they're like building blocks. Imagine, having this treasure trove of Legos. Each Lego is shaped a certain way and has a certain function and purpose. Imagine if in the future, when you go to solve a problem or create a project or create a blog post or launch an event or whatever it is, instead of starting from nothing and trying to just come up with something from nothing, you had a giant bin full of useful Legos, useful building blocks. That's what your second brain is for. Third is personal, right? Everything on Google, everything on Wikipedia is wonderful, but everyone else has access to that. There's no competitive advantage in knowing what is on the internet. It's all public. But there's certain kinds of knowledge. This is sometimes known as tacit knowledge or experiential knowledge. When you get fired from your job and you have this really intense personal experience, what did you learn from the experience? If you have a failure or a mistake that you make and you learn something, like a really deep personal lesson, write that down. That's not something you can just find online. That's something that's unique to you. It's hard-won through your personal experience. And fourth, just easily lost. I can now see the numbers are reversed, so I guess this is third, but basically, certain kinds of information like the manual for how to operate your fridge, okay? You don't need to keep that in your second brain. You just put it in that one drawer with all the other manuals. When you need to find that information, you'll know exactly where to find it. But there's other kinds of information that's inherently ambiguous, right? You find some really insightful idea about the nature of technology. Some philosopher really talks about how technology is changing the human spirit. Okay, that has no natural resting place. There's no, file in your filing cabinet for thoughts on inspirational, how technology is changing human nature. It's just something that might potentially be interesting to see in the future. It's ambiguous. Right? This is what your second brain is for, because your second brain can be backed up, it can be synced, you can access it on any device. And most crucially, you can search, right? You can just dump things in there and use search when you need to resurface it. So I want to get one level of detail, kind of go down one level of detail. These are kind of the 14 kinds of notes that I found myself keeping, just to be very concrete and specific. And I'll just briefly, marketing assets. If you create a slide, if you create a banner image, if you create a PDF for your course or whatever, those are assets. You wouldn't just get an asset and throw it in the backyard or in the basement, right? You would treat it with care, save those things, because you never know when they're going to be something that you can reuse. Think about mementos. When someone emails you, let's say they had an amazing experience in your online course, don't just, oh, that was nice, thank you, and then just delete that email just like any other. Forward that email to your second brain, because when you need some motivation in the future because you're feeling down, that's the place you're going to want to go to just remind yourself of the impact you're having. Reference and record keeping, legal documents, favorites. Instead of keeping your web bookmarks in your browser where they're just a list of links, where you can't really search those web pages, use a web clipper. And many of the leading notes apps have web clippers. Save the full content of that website to your notes, and then you can search it. In fact, you can search it even if that website goes offline. You have your own copy, your own version of it. Repurposed content. So, if let's say a thought leader that you follow, puts out a webinar that you just like how they design their slides, take that content, don't steal it and use it exactly as you found it, repurpose it, change it, use it as inspiration. New content, jot down some ideas of something while you were on a walk. That could be your next great blog post. That could be your next YouTube video. Language to borrow, nice terms or words or turns of phrase or metaphors, the contributions of others. There's nothing I love more than, taking notes on all the ideas, let's say from our team. We have such incredible people on our team, and then mixing them together in this big pot, maybe adding a few of my own ideas, and then coming up with something that no one person has ever been able to do on their own. Take notes on your calls and meetings. You never know when you need to reference. What did our client say 3 weeks ago on that Friday afternoon call? You just never know. Models, placeholders, research inspiration. We get into what these really look like in much more detail with a lot of examples in the course, but this is meant to sort of jog your memory. Look around you. Look around your desk. Look around your desktop on your computer. Look on your phone. Look in your camera roll. I'm certain all of these places are already filled with this kind of material. All you need to do is take that one extra step to centralize it, bring it into one place so that you'll know where to find that and it won't just kind of disappear. Okay, I'm going to move a bit faster here because I want to leave time for Q&A. Here's the amazing thing. Though. Okay, cool. Here's the big shift. It's become digital. Right? So note taking is harder in many ways now. It's more ambiguous, it's more uncertain, it's more long-term. But luckily, all of these things, the capturing of notes, identifying what to take notes on, searching, linking, sharing, largely has been automated. Not 100%. There's still some intervention. That's why I have a job. It still does require some skills, but huge swaths of note taking has been automated or partially automated using technology. So let's look at what that looks like. So actually, I have 3 examples that I want to show you, which is 3 kinds of information, sources of information that you're very likely already consuming. Right? Here's the thing. You don't need to read any more than you do. You don't need to learn any more than you do. You don't need to consume any more information than you do. You just need to save the best of what you're already consuming. If you just do that, you'll be awesome. You'll be so far ahead of all the people who don't do that. So let's look at what these look like. This is a Kindle ebook. It's not a Kindle device. It's the Kindle app on my iPad, which is how I read books. And I want to show you, as you're reading, how you can just with a swipe of the finger save a highlight. So let's say you find this phrase and you want to save it. You can just put down your finger and start dragging it across, and just the part that you drag across will be saved. If you then hit the share menu at the top right there, it will show you just your highlights. Hit share again, email. You can even choose your citation style. and it will generate a new email, which you can then email directly into your note-taking app. Most note-taking apps have this feature. It's like a special email address. And if you see the attachment right there, that's HTML, that HTML file has not the full text of the book, but only those highlights, only the very best parts that you wanted to save. That's it. You're already doing the work of reading. You can just export all of your highlights at once in one step. Let's look at an online article. You know, people are constantly sharing these articles with each other. Maybe your friend says, oh, you got to read this. You know, so you open the link on your phone and you kind of scroll down and you say, okay, well, this looks really interesting and cool, but I don't have time in the middle of the day to read this. What you can do is share it with an app called Instapaper, which is called a Read Later app. And if you go over to Instapaper, within a few seconds, as soon as it updates, there's the article in this very nice, clean interface for you to read it. So you could come back to this that evening, on the weekend, or weeks later. And from here on, it's exactly the same as the Kindle. You just select a word, drag that little handlebar to the text that you want to save, and you highlight all the parts that you want to save that seem interesting. Okay, you can set up an integration between Instapaper and a note-taking app such as Evernote so that without any further intervention on your part, each one of those highlights appear in your notes app. Okay, now think about how amazing this is. Any article from any source, you can take through this process, just add your highlights, and almost instantaneously, those highlights appear in your notes app. And that does require an integration to set up, but it's completely free. It's through a service called IFTTT. If you want to see what that looks like, I can address it in the Q&A. Let's say a website, you know, you're reading a website, has some interesting points. Let's say you just want to save parts of it. There's a plugin called Getliner, getliner.com. You can find it. It has a free version. And what you do is you add the extension to your browser. And then when you click that little button right there, it turns your cursor into like a web highlighter. What you then all you have to then do is highlight anything you want to save, click the share button right there. You can see you can export to multiple places. I export to Evernote. As soon as the export is done, you can head over to the Notes app, and there it is, right? It has the source link down at the bottom. It has exactly the part that you highlighted. It has the title, the author, everything. And the example I'm showing here is, you know, if I wanted to share this idea with someone, let's say it's someone I work with, think of how people normally do this. They'll send you the entire article. You really got to read this article, but you know, often you don't have the time to read the article, or it's like one thing that you want to take away from the article that's in paragraph, 13, and you don't want to spend 30 minutes reading this entire thing. So what this allows me to do is curate just this one sentence that I want to share with someone, put it into a note that I can edit. I can add my own bolding, and then I can share it directly with that person. It makes the things you share much more likely to be read. And then we have just a bonus one. This is me reading a PDF. I found some cool ways of doing an industry analysis that I thought might be useful to know in the future. I'm just going to highlight that text. I can even add my own note. You know, this would be a great checklist for industry analysis sometime in the future. Again, unknown when I'm going to find this useful. But from here, I can export that to Evernote, Notion, really any one of these notes apps. This is very widespread functionality. Then when I go over to the Notes app, I can do a search, and there is my PDF. So basically what we're talking about here is anything that you find from any source. I just showed 3 or 4 examples. There's many others that we have as part of our program, but you can save it. There's virtually always a way to move that content out of where you found it into an app of your choice. And this is an app called Readwise. We're not affiliated with them in any way. It's just we're fans. If you want to automate this even more, so you don't even have those manual steps that I showed you, you can pay $5 a month, and Readwise will basically take care of syncing your ebook and article highlights to your notes. So we're big fans of their product. So I want to kind of broaden now. We've covered the what and the how. I want to talk about a bit of the why. Why does all this matter? You know, what has really changed in the world that has made this idea of curating and capturing content so key? So first, I want to kind of show you that your second brain is not one thing. Sometimes people get really caught up on choosing the right app, right? Oh, is it Evernote? Is it Roam? Is it Simple Note? Is it Apple Notes? Is it OneNote, Devon Think? I mean, there's two or three or four dozen of these different apps, but I kind of see them interchangeably because the only thing that you need to be able to do is save content from these different apps to it. And the truth is that all these different apps work together, right? You might have voice transcription, voice memo apps, relator apps, scanning or drawing apps, screenshot apps, ebook apps. Like there's no way that you're going to find one tool that does all these different functions. And so it's really about sort of choosing a stack. It's choosing a toolkit of apps that you use in a systematic way together while saving the best parts all to one place, which is your digital notes. Okay. So really, I want to step way back and talk about the big picture here, which is, I think we're going through a transition from information overload, which is a term you're probably familiar with, right? It's been around for 20 years, where information overload doesn't quite capture the severity of the situation, right? That word overload is sort of abstract. It's like, oh, overload, information overload. But I think a more accurate term these days is information exhaustion. The volume of things that we are expected to look at and pay attention to and keep track of and actually somehow even do and execute is staggering. It's mind numbing, literally mind numbing. Just to give you some sense, I wanted to do some research with my notes on this topic, and the average information consumption per day for an adult is equal to 174 newspapers. You are somehow trying to read 174 newspapers every day worth of emails and articles and tweets and Facebook posts and Instagram messages and all these different things. We're now spending almost 12 hours a day consuming media of some kind. 12 hours. So, soon it's going to be a majority of our waking minutes we are going to spend consuming media. It's just unbelievable.
It's shocking. Yeah.
It really is, isn't it? And it's yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, even when you get the reminders on your phone of like the screen time that you've had, you're like, this can't be accurate, but here we are.
Yeah, it doesn't seem believable, does it? You're like, that can't be. But then you notice that, we work all day on our devices, and then it's kind of sad and ironic that we get off work, and then what are we doing? We're just back on our devices. just doing different things. And then if you see down at the bottom there, it's growing. So this isn't a problem that's going to resolve itself. No fancy new technology is going to come along and reverse the course. The amount of information is going to continue to increase day after week, after month, after year. This has led to this kind of pervasive feeling that I like to call FOMI, which is like FOMO, the fear of missing out, except it's the fear of missing information, right? So here's the thing. It's not just that there's too much and we can't get to it all. It's actually, if you really pay attention to your moment-to-moment experience, there is this background anxiety, this background fear that something is slipping through the cracks. Something is being missed. Something is being lost. Some opportunity, some insight, some bit of creativity, some fun, some breakthrough, isn't it? Like if you just kind of pay attention, can't you just kind of feel this background of anxiety that's kind of always there? This is the true impact of information exhaustion. It's not that you didn't get to one more book. It's this, even the stuff that you do pay attention to and that you do act on, you're afraid that you missed out on some key piece of information. It's FOMI. So what we're doing as a second brain, one way of understanding it is we're shifting people's mindset from the mindset of a consumer to the mindset of a curator, either a curator or a creator. Okay. So what this looks like is, instead of always being in public, like you think of a social media feed or Google or Facebook, everything is in public. Everyone is just constantly broadcasting everything they think all the time, top of mind idea. The second brain is something a little bit different. It's private. No one has access to your second brain. It's a private kind of little laboratory where you can work on things before they're ready to be in public. You can think about and analyze and try things and mix and match and contrast and compare away from the crazy limelight of the public internet, right? This is really what you need to be a creator, is you need that private space. This mindset shift, you're going from a constant obsession with novelty. You know, there's this constant refresh the news feed, refresh your Twitter feed. What new, what's new this minute, this minute, this minute. That you cannot do your best work in that environment, in that mindset. You need to shift more towards things that are timeless. Again, that's what a second brain does. That's what digital note-taking does. You spend as much time with notes that were taken last week or last year or years ago in some cases. In fact, you spend more time on those than just the headlines of the moment. You shift away from the sensational, constantly what is the clickbait headline trying to catch your attention, to things that are more subtle, you know, ideas that take digesting and thinking about and reflecting. That's what notes are so good for. And of course, this is, you know, the teachable mission. You go from consuming ever more data, more information, more tips, to actually creating, which is so tremendously clarifying. It's only when you actually go in and put something out there once it's ready that you see what works, what doesn't, what's good, what's bad, and you actually get feedback on your work so you can make it better. This slide encapsulates the mindset shift that my work is designed to help people make, from constant, mindless, infinite consumption to becoming a maker and a creator and an artist. It's really life-changing and transformational. Okay, so I'm gonna skip that one and just say a few thoughts about, you know, a common solution to this information exhaustion is this trend I call digital abstinence. Books like Essentialism, books like Deep Work, you know, this whole category of books and thought leaders that tell you it's too much, you can't handle it, you need to step away. You need to turn your devices off, unplug the Wi-Fi, you know, move to a cabin in the woods and just write your great novel. And I think there's a time and a place for that, for sure. Please, vacations, weekends, you know, sabbaticals are amazing. But I think for most of us, most of the time, that's not realistic. It's just not realistic. The internet is now not just it's not just a thing, it's a place. It's a place where everything is happening. There's this incredible flowering of human creativity and innovation and sharing and expression that has never happened in the world. Are you really going to walk away from that? Are you going to shut yourself off from this incredible flow of wisdom and insight and love and all this amazing stuff happening? It's just doesn't make sense. It's not smart. So there's a middle path between total mindless consumption and digital abstinence, which is really our information diet. You know, information is as essential as food. If you don't have food, you'll die. If you don't have information, this may seem strange, but think about it. You need information about your environment, about the future, about the past, about your own surroundings. You need information to do your work, to have relationships with the people you love. Information is essential to human existence, but we don't think of it as having a diet. Right? What is the stuff that you're putting into your mind the same way that you're putting food into your body? Do you have a filter and a sort of screen to keep out the information that is not meant to serve you, and to save and preserve for the long term the information that is? Are you making those decisions intentionally? Are you doing it mindfully? Do you have a tool, which I call a second brain, which is just your system of digital note-taking, to make it possible to even choose what it is that you're consuming in terms of information? And that's what I mean when I say building a second brain. It's something I think everyone needs to do urgently. It's really an important mindset shift and skill for all knowledge workers, or really all people to take on. And my life's work is dedicated to doing just that, helping people build their second brain.
Tiago, thank you so much for this. I mean, we have so many comments coming into the chat, but I really do appreciate your your approach to obviously digital note taking, but I think this is also going to save people a lot of time. I know personally when I'm reading articles, there's so many bookmarks, there's so many, oh, I'm going to read this later because I feel like I have to consume the whole thing and memorize the whole thing. So being able to take those pieces that are important, those things that are actually going to serve you later on or that you want to remember, I think is incredibly valuable. No matter what industry or what space you're in. So I appreciate you sharing that. And we have quite a few questions coming in. For those of you watching, first of all, can we give a big thank you to Tiago in the chat? I'd love to know what your biggest takeaway has been thus far, and type your questions in. You can basically dive into anything that we covered today. But our first question comes from Jonathan, who asks, one, do you export meeting notes from GoodNotes into Evernote? Two, I have a good system for getting info into Evernote, but then it's minimally organized. What's the most efficient, effective way to organize the info once it's in Evernote? So that was a bit of a long question, but thank you, Jonathan.
No, it's a great one. So for the first one, briefly, I think he's talking about the Goodreads book highlights, and I don't really need to do that because I just export directly from the book to my notes. So I sort of skip that step. But in general, yeah, book highlights, the thing is you've done all the work. By the time you spent 5 to 10 hours to read a book and a few seconds to make each highlight, why would you not just take that extra 2 minutes and save those highlights? So for sure. For the second one, so this is why my course exists, is, Evernote has over 200 million users. It was really the first breakthrough mainstream digital note-taking app. It was the first one that said, this is a category, digital notes are a thing. A lot of people, millions are going to be doing it. And 200 million users is massive. But I would say the average person who takes my course, especially in the beginning, they had saved tons of stuff in there, but then what? Totally. Like, what do I do with it? What's the next steps? How do I retrieve it? How do I organize it? And that's what my course is about. So my process is, you can follow it using the code acronym, CODE, which is capture, organize, distill, express. People generally understand the capture. You save it, you hit save, you hit export, that's great. The key is the 3 following steps: organize, distill, and express. And I have very specific ways of doing those things. For organize, I have a technique called PARA, P-A-R-A, which maybe Will, Will is my course manager, by the way. He's joining me on the call. Maybe you could drop the link to, I have a comprehensive free article on my blog that you can find out all about that. My technique for distillation, for distill, is called progressive summarization, which we also have a free guide to on the blog. And then express, we have some other things, but those are sort of more secret. But yeah, it's a pipeline. Like knowledge workers and creatives really don't think of their work this way. They think their work as this amorphous, just thing floating in the cloud. But think of your work as a factory. Okay, the raw materials come in, that's information. It goes through a series of steps, it gets processed, and then it goes out and it goes to consumers or customers, right? If you are trying to make any kind of creative living, which these days, if your job is not creative, you don't have a job. It's been taken over by machines. Everyone's work has some element of creativity. You just need a pipeline: in, process, out, in, process, out. And that's why I think this is a skill. It's a process worth learning rather than just, download an app and that's all you have to do.
Here's an interesting one from Marlon. What is your technique for taking digital notes when listening to a podcast? Do you need to have access to a device to write them down as you hear them?
Yeah, so, this workshop focuses on existing text, like on websites, articles, ebooks, but I take just as many notes just on the spur of the moment. And I tend to just use, what notes apps do so well is there's so many different ways to get information into them, right? Like if you're on, I don't know, Airtable or Notion, I guess Notion is different, but if you are trying to input things in a spreadsheet, there's one way to do that. You have to open the whole spreadsheet, find the cell, and just types. But let's just take Evernote as an example. I can use the mobile app. I can type into the mobile app, or I can do a voice memo. I can forward an email that someone has sent me directly into Evernote. Many notes apps have this email to feature that you can use. I have a little menu bar item on my computer. It's like a little Evernote icon. I click and then a little window drops down so I can take notes even without opening the app. Like I'd say 50 to 60% of my notes get into there without me even opening the program. Right? Think how frictionless that is. You don't even need the program open. You just route things from across your digital world to that place. And next time you go there, there they are. They just are there. And so I'd say, yeah, like the informality of note taking is a superpower, right? You don't need to spin up a new Word doc, a Google doc. Each note is so quick and dirty. It's so on the spur of the moment. There's no headings, there's no columns, rows. It's just a little blank piece of text. You can just stick it in there, hit save, and you're done. It's the quickest and dirtiest way of working with information that I've ever found.
That's great. Kent has a great question. They're wondering, what is the best way to identify the system that works for you? And thank you for your time, they say.
You know, it's really experimentation. You can't, this is why, again, I wish there was just an app. I could just say, that's your second brain, just download it. But it's a process. It's a process of personalization, right? So depending on if you work with image or video or text, your workflow is going to look different. Depending on if you mostly read books or articles or podcasts, audio or things that are visual. It depends on if your work is highly formal. Like if you're a scientist, there's going to be an extra level of rigor. Or if you are a chef, it's going to be less formal, right? It really depends. And this is why, you know, our course, actually, this is relevant to Teachable. We originally at some stage had a self-paced course, which are wonderful for certain things, right? You put up a bunch of videos and you have the PDFs and you just go through the course, you get an answer to your problem and you're done. And originally that's what we tried, but then eventually we just realized that building a second brain is actually this, like I've been saying, this deep mindset shift. And now we do it live. The entire course is delivered via live Zoom calls. And then we just get those recordings and just put the recordings on Teachable, right? So you can access them later, but the whole course is delivered live. And the reason for that is real change only happens socially, right? To really have a mindset shift, you have to look someone in the eye like we're doing here, Jess, right? Like, see and be seen, and to sort of work through it with them, talk it through, like what are the pros, what are the cons? Like there's like a coaching element that we really do that is essential because you have to really adapt it to your situation. You can't just get what I do and perfectly 100% apply it to yourself. I'm sorry, I wish there was a way. It's experimentation. Try as many different ways as you can and look for models. I guess that's the one possible shortcut, is if you find examples of people who are like you. And it's one reason, you know, we're going to have over 1,000 people in this cohort of the course, 1,000 people from over 60 countries. So somewhere from every walk of life, every profession, every background, every age, somewhere in there is going to be someone like you. I encourage you to find them in our online forum, which is attached to Teachable. We have interest groups. There's, you know, there's a channel for paper people. There's a channel for second brain students from Manchester, United Kingdom. There's like, there's ones in languages I don't even understand. I think Japanese and Chinese. There's like over 100 interest groups. So you can burrow in on your particular kind of note taking, and then you can eat your heart out and find out what that little sub niche of people does for their notes.
That's brilliant. And I think community is a very big part of learning a new skill, having some accountability as well. So that's really neat to hear that you have people in all the pockets of the world. Hugo is wondering, hi, Tiago, building a second brain is designed to be a personal knowledge system, or could it be used also as a group KMS in a company? Thanks.
Yeah, it's one of the most common questions is, this is great at the individual level, but how about my team, my company, my community? And here's what I'd say. I'd say there are some principles in common, but it's very different. And actually a pitfall. So here's a common pitfall: to try to do it at the group level before you've done it at the personal level, right? It's sort of like productivity. If you try to make a whole, like your team, let's say you lead a team or you work as part of a team. If you try to make the whole team productive and you haven't figured out your own to-do list, it's not going to work. You're not going to have the authority and the credibility and the example to set. You know, you're going to be trying to change how everyone else works. And they're going to be like, well, how about you? You don't, you know, you're a mess. It's the same thing with knowledge management. And you sort of have to be a role model before others are going to start to believe, oh, this is something that could really add value to our company. I've seen it many times. Often the company will try to do it top down. The CEO or the COO will come in and say, now we are doing knowledge management. All of you are required to input your knowledge into this tool. That never works. It never works. Everyone starts to resist it and avoid it and find ways around it because no one wants to be told what to do. No one wants to be told what to do. They need to be enrolled. They need to be inspired. And that takes you being an example. This is why I encourage you, learn it for yourself, then take it into your team and teach them is the best path.
That's great. M here has a question. What is your approach for synthesizing new information from existing notes?
I mean, that's code. Capture, organize, distill, express. One way to think of it is all I'm doing again and again and again is capturing, taking in information, breaking it into pieces, organizing them just a little bit, distilling them down into like concise summaries that I can actually use, and then putting it out into the world. Then I get feedback, and that's more information, take back in, capture, organize, distill, express. This is my work. It's just this constant movement in and out, in and out. At every pass through the system, it gets better. It gets richer, more insightful, more interesting, more impactful. So I'd say my process is my whole process. That's what it is. It's a process for filtering, distilling, preparing. It's kind of like a chef. You don't go to the grocery store, dump all the groceries on your counter, and then just start cooking, right? There's really, if you really look at it, there's distinct steps. First, you put everything away. That's like capture and organize. Something's in the fridge, pantry, over here, over there. Then you distill, right? This one's harder to see, but have you noticed there's usually a pre-step before the cooking? You have to mix the vinaigrette. You have to get the big hunk of meat and chop it into pieces. You have to get the carrots and chop those. There's always like a distillation, it's like you're taking just the parts that you need. And then once all those steps are done, then you can cook. And that's what we mean when we say cooking. We don't just mean the last step. We mean all of those steps that came before. It's the same thing with knowledge. You're basically cooking knowledge. You're a knowledge chef.
That's great. Here's a fun one from Sean. In retrospect, do you think you've ever overcomplicated any of your systems? And if so, how do you fix it?
Yeah, that's what I'm constantly doing again and again is overcomplicating it and then coming back. Like this is the funny thing. You kind of have to go through this, but I kind of hope after more than 10 years of repeatedly doing it wrong, overcomplicating it, over-engineering it, trying to use too many apps to do too many things, trying to make it too precise, not precise enough. It's like I've made probably not every mistake, but hundreds of mistakes. And so one of my big motivations as a teacher, I mean, it's kind of what every teacher does. We want to make it easier on people. We want them to at the very least have fewer steps and fewer mistakes along the way than we had to have. And it's funny to speak to the question. The biggest way I do that is to constantly tell people to not overdo it. Because people come into this course, they're like, I'm going to organize the entire world, every piece of data, and then my entire life is going to be perfectly segmented and categorized and tagged. And the thing is, to sustain this behavior over long periods of time, it has to be dead simple, simpler than you think, simpler than you expect. Otherwise, it becomes this grand contraption. And as soon as life gets busy, or you get sick, or work gets crazy, or whatever, life happens, it collapses like a house of cards. And then you just don't get any of the value. It's kind of heartbreaking to not have all the value just because you took it too far. So it's kind of funny. People come into my program thinking I'm going to tell them to do all these extra things. And most of the time I'm telling them to do less.
It's funny. I think we have this perception that it has to be complicated to be effective. And it's like, no, like, what else should I do? What else should I do? But really, I think sometimes, and the way that you've laid this out, it's very practical. It's very efficient. And yet you get the most out of what you're doing.
Exactly.
Linda says, I love his sense of humor. Will there be a replay? Yes. Okay, Carl has a question here. Tiago, do you have a recommendation for how to keep all of the Chrome browser windows open and easily accessible? As some pages get used daily, others weekly, others monthly, others when I when I do my next XYZ project. Personally, I find the bookmarks not so intuitive, so I leave all my browser panes open all the time. Carl, I think a lot of us can relate to this question.
Yeah, you know what's so interesting is, so I would say don't have windows open, don't have tabs open to as far as you can get away with it. You know, what's so interesting is people tell me, oh, I don't have time for this. I don't have time to create a second brain and to do digital note taking. And then, you know, I sometimes do coaching and I'll sit with people at their computer and just see how they work. And I start to look over the shoulder and I go, okay, so you have all these bookmarks in your browser or tabs open you're trying to keep organized. Your desktop is covered in things that you're trying to keep organized. Your documents folder, then you have your, you know, your filing system on your computer. It's like we actually already have all this information and we're trying to keep it organized and we're trying to keep it managed. And what you can do is centralize all that activity. So like when you look at my Chrome browser, I have 0 bookmarks and never more than 2 or 3 tabs open. Why? Because I'm not trying to use the browser to manage tabs. That's not what a browser was for. Every time I walk away from my computer or I end my work for the day, I'm saving whatever actually needs to be saved in my second brain, which means all these other places can be extremely simple and minimalistic. My desktop is always empty. My documents folder has 4 folders and nothing else. My bookmarks are empty. My desk is empty. Like, it's really funny. People think I'm a minimalist. In fact, I just sort of funneled all of the OCD organizing note taking into one place so then I can just manage it centrally. And then the rest of my life gets to be free and easy and simple. If you're a little bit OCD like I am, it's such a relief because it satisfies the OCD part. Like, you know, it's somewhere, but you don't have to deal with that complexity in every single location separately. That's what we're talking about here. Centralize it.
That's brilliant. Tiago, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for sharing all of this. How can we stay in touch with you? I know there's going to be so many questions that we didn't get to today, but what's the best place for people to stay connected? And I'll add the links in the chat here.
Yeah, I mean, a few things. The blog is an awesome resource. We have hundreds of posts. Most of them are free on every aspect of this that you can imagine. I have a podcast, which covers the 10 principles of building a second brain that you can listen to. We have communities. We have a free Facebook group, free Slack community, which you can find links to on our website, which are extremely active. Some of the most caring, conscientious, just cool people anywhere can be found there. Yeah, just get involved in our community, consume some of the free content we have. And of course, if you really want to go heads first into the deep end, take the course. It just happens twice a year. In the spring and in the fall. And that's kind of like the main event of the year. And then we have smaller workshops, webinars like this one, podcasts, all different things that happen throughout the year. So really it's a choose your own adventure buffet. You can engage in any way you please, and we'll be happy to have you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Adding in all those links in the chat so you guys can just click through to access them. And yeah, thanks for spending your time with us. And for those of you watching, we will see you, I guess, in the next Discover workshop. Hopefully see you guys. I think it is tomorrow, but looking forward to it. Thanks so much, Tiago.
Thank you so much, Jess, and everyone for being here. I really appreciate it. Thank you.